Okay, welcome to Race and Gender in the History of U.S. Photography. Today I'm going to talk a bit about digital photography and then about how digital photography is entwined with the way that 9/11, September 11th, 2001, was recorded. I will start with a brief discussion of photographic milestones that led to the digital era. Then I'll give some brief remarks on World War II war photography. Then I will speak briefly about September 11th, 2001. Then I will ask you to screen a 5-minute video on your own, and there is a link coming up. And finally, we will look at some photographs of 9/11 and its aftermath. I want to remind us that in the almost 200-year span of photography that we have seen in this class, digital photography is really relatively recent. And here we have an image of the first mass-produced camera, the Kodak Brownie, that began being sold in 1900. 72 years later, we get the Polaroid SX70, the first instant camera with self-developing film. You'll note on the bottom here, they're advising you to, quote, just touch the red electric button and I'm going to leave the rest up to the camera. "20 years later, in 1992, the first widely available consumer digital camera is released. The Apple QuickTake 100 was manufactured by Kodak. It cost $749 and it could take between 8 and 32 pictures. To give a sense of how photography has changed over time, let's consider that in 1839, photography was variously invented across the globe. By 1900, Kodakery became a craze with the invention of the Brownie camera. In 1950, 2 million snapshots were taken across the globe. 1972, Polaroid releases its SX70, the instant camera with self-developing film. 1990, Photoshop is released. 1994, Apple QuickTake, manufactured by Kodak, the first widely available digital camera, is introduced. In 1999, the first camera phone is introduced in Japan. 2002, first camera phone available in the United States. You'll note that this is after the attacks of September 11th, 2001. 2006, camera phones surpass sales of both digital and film cameras. 2009, Kodak stops making Kodachrome film. 2012, Kodak files for Chapter 11 bankruptcy. By the year 2013, 90% of people have only ever taken a photograph with their phone. 2019, 657 billion snapshots are uploaded globally, which is, of course, a small fraction of the photographs taken. I'm going to talk soon about how digital photography is intertwined with the way that 9/11 was recorded and remembered. But before I do that, I need to explain that photography of American involvement in the war before this time period, before 9/11, had been incredibly controlled by media relations teams organized by President Roosevelt, Edgar Hoover, director of the FBI, and then President Truman. For instance, during World War II, the government did not allow photographs of the war dead until the last 6 months of the conflict. Instead, we see, or the public saw, photographs like this, triumphant, celebratory photographs of strong, successful soldiers here erecting the flag in Iwo Jima, which was actually a very bloody battle. Note that this photograph has come to stand in for the moment that soldiers summited and took Mount Suribachi on Iwo Jima, but it was actually the second flag that had been erected that day. It won the Pulitzer Prize for photography in 1945 and has become a powerful symbol of victory, a photographic icon in its own right. Other than becoming a World War II icon, it was also the basis for the Marine Corps Memorial Sculpture in Washington, D.C., some of you may know about. I'm showing it now to emphasize the prescripted types of photographs of war involving the United States that the public was exposed to. Further, when the United States dropped atomic bombs on the Japanese cities of Hiroshima and then Nagasaki in 1945, instantly eviscerating hundreds of thousands of people, the United States government restricted photographs of the cities and the aftermath of the nuclear bombs. And additionally, government censors seized all films and still photographs of the two cities and kept them classified for decades. What you're looking at here are examples of the kinds of photographs that were taken and not seen for decades. These were photographs of Ground Zero, Hiroshima, taken by the U.S. Strategic Bombing Survey, which was made under the direction of President Truman. The bombing survey was a group of just over 1,000 people, both military personnel and civilians. Photographs like this are images of absence and annihilation, and no one saw them for decades. This is a photograph showing the shape of a Hiroshima victim burned into steps. The heat and light generated by the atomic bomb was so intense that it changed the shades of roads and buildings, leaving areas quote unquote protected by human bodies closer to their original shades. 140,000 people were instantly killed at Hiroshima, and these kinds of photographs were censored as much as possible. These were, by the way, 140,000 deaths. Those were just the instantaneous deaths, not the deaths of people who suffered from radiation poisoning. So instead of seeing images of loss or death, the photos that the American public would have seen were usually aerial views or mushroom clouds, which I will show next. These are both abstract and highly removed from the immediacy of the destruction. This is a photograph showing the 45,000 foot tall mushroom cloud erupting over Nagasaki. It reached over 8 miles into the sky. It was taken by 26-year-old Lieutenant Charles Levy, who captured it on his personal camera. Of course, it does not show the over 3-mile radius of carnage, and it exemplifies how U.S. officials controlled information about radiation, here choosing this simple and again abstracted image of war. U.S. officials controlled information about radiation from the atomic bombs dropped over Japan, also by censoring newspapers and by limiting circulation of the earliest official medical reports, and by outright lies and denial. The fact that photographs and information were controlled in this way ended up shaping a more positive popular opinion about atomic bombs. This kind of governmental control of photography begins to break down during the Vietnam War era, but it does so to an even greater degree around 9/11 and the Iraq War because of digital photography, because of its immediacy, its ease, its accessibility, and its shareability. To give us a brief reminder of the facts about the events that came to be known as 9/11. There were a series of 4 coordinated terrorist attacks by the Islamic terrorist group Al-Qaeda against the United States on the morning of Tuesday, September 11th, 2001. 4 passenger airlines were hijacked. 2 of the planes, American Airlines Flight 11 and United Airlines Flight 175, were crashed into the north and south towers of the World Trade Center complex in Lower Manhattan. Within an hour and 42 minutes, both 110-story towers collapsed. The 3rd plane was crashed into the Pentagon the headquarters of the U.S. Department of Defense in Virginia, and the fourth plane was initially flown toward D.C., but crashed into a field in Pennsylvania after its passengers thwarted the hijackers. The attacks killed nearly 3,000 people, injured over 6,000 others, and more people died of cancer and respiratory diseases in the months and years following the attacks. The attacks took place in densely populated areas in a time before cell phone cameras, but there were digital cameras, so bystanders as well as journalists could go straight to ground zero with their portable cameras and take numerous photographs as the attacks were playing out. Within minutes of the first impact, the New York Times had already dispatched 4 photographers. I want to spend a little time with this photograph taken of firefighters at ground zero erecting a United States flag. You would be correct to notice its resemblance in subject matter to the Iwo Jima photograph of US soldiers erecting a flag. And like that photograph, it is not an image of death or destruction, but of heroes and of strength and resilience. It has become a kind of icon in its own right of the 9/11 tragedy and has come to honor the 343 firefighters who died at the World Trade Center disaster, and has also come to honor more than, at least 200 more firefighters who have died since then because of exposure to toxic contaminants, injury, post-traumatic stress disorder, chronic infections, etc., etc. The newspaper for whom Thomas Franklin worked and took this photograph received over 30,000 requests to republish the image. As an image of strong white men, it became an icon of the 9/11 tragedy. It was also subsequently criticized as an icon for only showing white men, when there were, of course, firefighters of various ethnicities. The New York Fire Department actually unveiled a study for a memorial statue based on this photograph, but instead of showing 3 white firefighters, showed 1 Latino, 1 black, and 1 white. This created a controversy, and the sculpture itself was never made. The next photograph I would like to spend a little time with is this photograph by Richard Drew that's come to be known as the Falling Man. I'd like you to spend a little time looking at this photograph and thinking about it as a photograph that has come to be another iconic photograph of 9/11. I would also like for you to screen this 5-minute video of the Falling Man, about the Falling Man, and the making of the Falling Man. The link is here. It's also uploaded to Moodle. And after you do so, and after you spend some time looking at and thinking about the photograph, consider answering the question on Moodle: why do you think the Falling Man photograph became so widely produced? What about the substance of the photograph, the formal makeup of the photograph? I am curious to hear your input. Another important kind of photograph taken at 9/11, on 9/11, was this kind of photograph taken by New York Times reporter Angel Franco. He was in the Bronx covering a local political campaign, but as soon as he heard what was going on, he headed down to ground zero. And he photographed the experience of witnessing the attack rather than the attack itself. I'm going to talk now about two key ways that digital photographs were used in the aftermath of 9/11. The first of these photographic usages were these missing person flyers that blanketed New York in the days and weeks after the attacks. For New Yorkers, the flyers were a constant and powerful reminder of their lost loved ones and neighbors. Approximately 90,000 of these were hung across the city. They covered walls, lampposts, subway stops, and phone booths all across the city. They speak to the high degree of confusion. There's a sort of mass confusion. Cell phones weren't really working because networks were overloaded. Many people didn't have email at this time. Parts of the city were blocked off. And so people didn't know if their family members were alive, were in the hospital, or where they were. And they took to making these signs that were usually a combination of photograph and text. These missing person posters were often made quickly with basic identifying information: height, weight, eye and hair color, birth date, contact phone numbers, since not everyone had email. And nearly every one of them listed the floor of the World Trade Center tower that the missing person worked on. And those numbers are still terrifying because from them you can know how likely it is that the person survived or did not survive. And almost all of the posters bore pictures, mostly snapshots of family gatherings, friends together, but also some posed photographs from proms or weddings. The point is that digital photography made it possible to print these posters quickly at home and to post them all over the city. Here we have on the left a New York University Medical Center wall. These were plastered to the side of a hospital wall. And on the right, we have a makeshift memorial. In the days and weeks that followed 9/11, the flyers, missing person flyers, transitioned to being sort of forms of memorial. And certainly making and showing these were ways that people could be active in their search rather than just waiting helplessly. This was a ritualistic photographic process and experience that worked in a memorial capacity. Another way in which digital photography was key to the aftermath of 9/11 has to do with the spread of misinformation and conspiracy theories. We see in these cases that the digital photograph's unstable relationship to truth and objectivity allowed hoaxes and conspiracy theories to proliferate across the globe in a very, very short amount of time. They all relied on photography's truth factor. We're looking here at a photograph of the damaged Pentagon, and one of these conspiracy theories that started just hours after the attacks was the idea that 9/11 was an inside job, that the government allowed or even enacted the collapse of the Twin Towers in order to justify the war on terror and to justify the invasion of Afghanistan and Iraq. These conspiracy theories often involved looking at digital photographs for evidence of something that the government was hiding, such as the windows of the Pentagon still being intact or the site of impact not being large enough. Interestingly, in a kind of reversal, these conspiracy theories also hinged on claims that some of the officially distributed photographs were photoshopped. So in these cases, we see a rejection of the truth factor and a non-trusting of photographic evidence. In both ways, photographs were used to help legitimize these conspiracy theories. And part of the reason why photographs were no longer trusted necessarily as evidence of truth is because of photographs like this. This has come to be known as the tourist guy. This photograph widely circulated after just a couple weeks after 9/11. This snapshot depicts a tourist standing on the observation deck of the World Trade Center, apparently just seconds before the impact of one of the hijacked passenger airlines, which is visible behind him. The claim was that the emergency services found a camera in the rubble and that the film inside was taken away and processed, and they found the last photographs of this man's life standing on top of the World Trade Center. This story was compelling to people because it showed the world the instant before the world changed. As we know, this photograph was a fake. Hungarian Peter Guzli, who took the photograph in 1997, said that he edited the photograph as a joke for his friends and did not realize it would spread across the internet as rapidly as it did. So Tourist Guy became a popular meme. He floated into depictions of different historical tragedies, as well as Hollywood versions of destruction and death. And I'll conclude here and say I think we can see how digital photography has been implicated in the spread of information for communication and finding loved ones, but also for sharing misinformation and theories. The digital photograph's ability to be easily altered to create a facsimile of reality began to undercut the truth value of photography in very significant ways.